and death and decay to this sweet savor unto the Lord. The burning has transformed the odor. So we already begin to see that there's a transition as we move through the temple, as we go through the temple, and we'll see this as we move closer to the Holy of Holies, the holy place. There's going to be a progression in terms of smell as much as there is movement and other areas that we talk about. The gradations of holiness that was mentioned earlier by Dr. Perry gets reflected in the odor experience that you end up having as well, the scent experience. So that's the sacrifice. You've made a transformation from these odors of death and everything to the sweet savor for the Lord. And that kind of leads us into the next set, the incense rituals. Now, the incense that was offered up at the temple had three primary, let's back up. You've got three primary ways in which incense was used in the temple. First one, daily incense offering that you read about there in Exodus chapter 30, verses 1 through 8. And I think, personally, that you get a great example of how this was done, or better yet, how it was not to be done, from Leviticus 10, 1 through 3. That's the whole Nadab-Abihu story. Then you have the incense that is to be used on the Day of Atonement, as described in Leviticus 16, and an interesting one that you find in Numbers 16, when Israel's experiencing a plague. This is the whole Korah rebellion. When Israel ends up experiencing that and the murmuring from the Lord of these things, there is a plague, and Aaron is told by Moses, run out there with the incense, and the sweet incense, the same incense that you would offer, and stand between them and end the plague. And so we'll come back and see if we can fit this into a pattern. Are there similarities to these events? Well, one has to be, of course, the incense. The incense is going to be a much better smell than the smell of death and decay. So we already have a contrast right there. But as where we deal with changes of the odor as a transformation, so it is in the incense as well. When we look at the daily incense offering, these are the instructions. Okay, so first of all, Leviticus there it sets up, Exodus sets up here that the altar to burn incense. Where are you going to put it? You're going to put it before the Ark of the Testimony in the temple there, before the mercy seat. Kind of a nice little illustration off to the side. And you're going to burn it every morning and every dawn and at dusk, at the same time that you happen to ready the lamps in the holy place as well. And it's to be done always, a perpetual incense offering before the Lord. One of the interesting things about this is that it happens to fit, in terms of ritual theory, a pattern known as liminality. Liminality, right here, it comes from the Latin word limen, meaning threshold or doorway, and what it represents is a place. Okay, it's a state which exists outside of two other states, and usually is used for progression from one into the other. And so in this case, notice that death, the womb, cocoons, doorways, these are all spaces that exist between two separate states, and liminality is when you are in those to make this progression. Notice the time space that exists for the individual in the transition stage, where they do not belong anywhere yet, but are transforming and becoming something that is useful. And this is mainly taken from Victor Turner stuff, but liminality allows for change without fracturing the greater social structure. So it's a way to incorporate change without destroying the overall structure. Now, I bring up, I'm going to go back with that. We'll come back to that picture in a bit. I bring up this liminality because if you look at just in terms of the incense's daily offering in its temporal state, it's offered at dawn and dusk. Those are liminal states. They exist between day and night in both cases. And so you have this incense offering which is associated in terms of time with liminality. So we'll come back and talk about that here a little bit later. This liminality will be found elsewhere. Now, the example that I used was of Nadab and Abihu back there from Leviticus chapter, better make sure I get this right, chapter 10. Pulled this picture off. There happens to be, someone did a project of doing the Bible in Legos, and so I thought I'd give you the picture of Nadab and Abihu here, right? Happy people. But what do we know about them? Well, from Leviticus 10 is usually taken by itself, and yet should fit with material that you find at the very end of chapter 9. Why? Because one of the things that you find out about the daily incense offering is that it was to be offered up at the same time that you offer up the daily burnt offering outside on the altar of burnt offering. And thus there's continuity between a series of rituals all associated with the dawn and dusk. I think what you're seeing in Leviticus 9 and 10 is Nadab and Abihu offering up the daily incense ritual. Perhaps the first one but it's fitting the daily pattern. They offer up the burnt offering, and the Lord accepts it. Then you get chapter 10 opening them up, and you see what they do. They take the incense, and something goes wrong. Whatever exactly the strange fire is, and there's some controversy as to what it is, it's clearly demonstrating that the ritual is being performed wrongly. And so they suffer the consequences. When people have talked about this event, what they have often left out is they talk about why do you even have the daily incense ritual? And I think you find the solution in what Moses tells Aaron that the Lord told Moses concerning these things. This is that the Lord spake, saying, I will be sanctified in them that come nigh me, and before all the people I will be glorified. Here's your reasoning why you do have the daily incense offering. In this case, these two verbs in the verse are nephals, and they're being read here as passives. I will be sanctified, I will be glorified. But one of the interesting things about those nephals is that they can also be treated as reflexives. And when it does, and if you take that as the translation, then Moses said unto Aaron, this is that the Lord spake, saying, I will show myself holy in those who come near me, and before all the people I will manifest my glory myself. What that suggests is God's presence will always be before the temple, be at the temple. And because it's always at the temple, you are going to have to come unto him. God doesn't need to be sanctified by you. You need to be sanctified as you come before God, if that makes sense. God is already sanctified. He has told the people over and over, I am holy, so you be holy. You need to become sanctified. And what he's suggesting then is that the incense offering is a way in which these priests become sanctified before they come before the Lord. He will be there, and he will be there in his sanctified state, and he will be there in his glorified state. It's up to the priests to become such, to raise themselves up to that state, and the incense ritual is the means by which they do so. That Nadab and Abihu did it wrong, suffer the consequences. When you are not ready and not prepared, you come before the Lord, you're going to end up perishing for it. He is glorious. He is sanctified. You need to get yourself ready for that. And I think you can find that same meaning showing up in the offerings that are offered up on the Day of Atonement. According to Leviticus 16, which is fascinating, it's all about the Day of Atonement here, Yom Kippur, but it's fronted by a reference back to the story of Nadab and Abihu. Back in chapter 10. That's verse 1 of chapter 16 opens up with the Lord saying, all right, now, if you remember back, we dealt all this stuff with the sons, and we get more information. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, speak unto thy brother, that would be Aaron, that he come not at all times into the holy place within the veil before the mercy seat which is upon the ark, that he die not, for I will appear in the cloud upon the mercy seat. Now, this seems to suggest the purpose to the Day of Atonement. Ultimately, it's that God's going to be there. Aaron is not supposed to go before God all the time, and that makes this last clause kind of interesting. Is it saying here that Aaron is not to approach because God is in the cloud, or that he's only to approach when the cloud is present? Those seem to be two different things there. Is Aaron not supposed to go into the Holy of Holies except when the cloud is there, or is Aaron never shall go into the Holy of Holies because God is in the cloud? I think you find the answer a little bit later on in the chapter. Before Aaron is to go in and offer up the incense offering, or put the blood on the altar, blood on the Ark of the Covenant, supposedly cleansing the tabernacle, he is told first to go in with incense and create a cloud, and this is why. He shall take a censer full of burning coals of fire from off the altar before the Lord, and his hands full of sweet incense beaten small, and bring it within the veil. And he shall put the incense upon the fire before the Lord, that the cloud of the incense may cover the mercy seat that is upon the testimony, that he die not. The purpose of the incense is to keep him alive. That it needs to be done the right way seems to be the case here. And now that he is alive, now he can perform the rest of the rituals that are associated with the Day of Atonement. Now, is this meant to be as merely protection, or does it have to do with the transforming of Aaron so that he can be in the presence of God? That to me is different than protection, which suggests he's going to remain in the state that he is forever, so he needs to have a barrier. I'm suggesting here that the incense offering isn't so much a barrier as a means by which he can enter, that you end up in a liminal state here, that the incense creates an environment by which the divine and mortal can work together. Not merely protection, but a coming together, an inclusion. And the incense provides this as he enters into the divine world of the pleasant sense and the realm of God. And now can perform the rest of the rituals that are so necessary for Israel's salvation. Just a nice little picture of him being able to do that, right? There's the rest of the rituals that he can perform. Now he can kill the goat of the sin offering and bring his blood within the veil. Can't do that until the incense is put down there first. Once the incense cloud is there, now he can do the rest of it. And that takes us to the third big event associated with the incense, and that's that whole plague thing. And by now, hopefully, you can see some similarities